So going back to cardiovascular regulation. So there is always changes of blood flow based on what's happening inside your body. There are different places where blood's flowing when you are at rest or when you are moving around. So changes to blood flow happens kind of at the right time, at the right area, and doesn't change blood pressure overall, at least significantly. And the major one is flow to vital organs like the kidneys and liver. So there's three mechanisms: autoregulation, neural, and endocrine. So again, autoregulation, think of it as auto as self and regulation. So this is self-regulated. So it's able for the tissues to actually control or regulate their own blood supply. So what they can do, and again, is adjust their peripheral resistance. Cardiac output's not change, but they can adjust their peripheral resistance. So what's that going to be majorly? Vessel diameter. That, remember, is the major factor for changing peripheral resistance is the diameter. So what are we going to do? We're either going to vasodilate, which is increase that diameter of the blood vessel, so make it larger, or we're going to vasoconstrict. And that's going to make the diameter of the blood vessels smaller. So remember, vasodilate is going to decrease resistance, which increases blood flow. So if you want to increase the blood flow to an area, then you're going to dilate and you're going to decrease the resistance. If you want to decrease the blood flow to an area, you are going to constrict. That increases the resistance and decreases the blood flow. So we have local vasodilators, meaning they are going to make the blood vessel diameter larger, and that's going to increase blood flow. Why are you going to do so? What are some kind of characteristics of why you would want to vasodilate? First off, low oxygen. Well, oxygen is needed for the tissues to make ATP in their mitochondria. So no oxygen, not a lot of ATP, not a lot of energy. They can't do their normal functions, so that's dangerous. Also, high carbon dioxide levels. That is a waste product of making ATP. So you've made a lot of ATP, you've made a lot of CO2, but it's still hanging out. That is actually damaging and not proper for the tissues as well. Low pH. Now remember, low pH is anything kind of lower, which makes it acidic. So that's going to be less than 7. Low pH means that there's oftentimes a lot more carbon dioxide. There might be lactic acid around. They might be more kind of waste products of metabolism where the tissues have been working hard, but there's not enough of movement of taking it away. Nitric oxide is an actual compound that will cause vasodilation. So it's actually used for vasodilation. That's why it's also a med given automatically for heart attacks to vasodilate, increase blood flow. High potassium ion concentration. So it can actually cause where you need increased blood flow because there's too much potassium around, or hydrogen ion concentration that goes to the low pH. Chemicals that are released by inflammation. Now we're going to talk about inflammation a lot when we get to the immune system, but you know if something's inflamed where it's red and swollen and painful and warm, those are all signs of inflammation. So that is all because, or at least partly because, of increased blood flow. And you can imagine you want something, if it's inflamed, you want to increase blood flow to the area because what do you want to go there? You want to increase what blood cells to the area. That's how you're going to do it. increased blood flow. Another thing is elevated local temperature. So if something's heated, you're going to vasodilate. That is how you can lose more heat. So heat can be released and it can help cool you down. So opposite is true. If you have local vasoconstrictors, then they're going to decrease blood flow. So again, autoregulation is going to be changes, specifically going to be at the capillary level. Oftentimes we can have vasoconstriction at the arterial level, but also we can see it at those precapillary sphincters. If they're open, then blood flow is going to go into the capillaries. If they're closed, then they're not going to. And a lot of times they're in response to what's going on into that interstitial fluid. So again, the level of oxygen, the level of carbon dioxide. Again, dilation of the blood vessel is going to be vasodilators. Lactic acid is going to increase blood flow because you want to get rid of it. Again, lactic acid is going to decrease pH. So that's one of the components. So you can do it either with the sphincters, but vasodilators often are going to be at the arterial level. And so they'll kind of control what's going into the capillaries as well. So normal blood pressure and volume, you have high temperature, decreased oxygen, low pH, increased carbon dioxide. These are inflammatory kind of chemicals, or just simply increased tissue activity, exercise. You're increasing your muscle activity. So you all of a sudden, for whatever reason, when this first starts, you don't have enough blood flow and pressure. So you're going to decrease the resistance, meaning you're going to dilate, make it larger, and that's going to increase blood flow. Remember, they're inversely related. Decrease resistance, increase blood flow. Then you get blood flow back to restored and you're going back to normal. Neural control, we mentioned this in the cardio chapter. So cardiovascular center, medulla oblongata is going to be in the brainstem. We have the cardioinhibitory center. That is going to decrease cardiac output, mainly by decreasing heart rate. So you decrease the heart rate, there's less blood flowing out of the heart per minute, because remember, cardiac output is heart rate times stroke volume. If you decrease the heart rate, then you're going to decrease cardiac output. So that's going to significantly decrease blood flow. Remember, cardioacceleratory center is going to increase the heart rate. Same thing, heart rate times stroke volume. If you increase the heart rate, you're going to increase cardiac output, which will increase blood flow. So this is just showing you same thing. So if you have homeostasis disturbed, you have a low blood pressure. This is going to be baroreceptors, which are going to be stretch receptors oftentimes. So you have less stretch on these receptors. So they're saying that the pressure is low. Because if you don't have as much stretch on these receptors, if you have normal, it's going to push against them. If you only have a little bit pushing against it, then they're going to respond. So you are in the low BP, you are going to want to increase blood flow and increase cardiac output. So you're going to stimulate an increase in heart rate, which is going to increase cardiac output. You don't want to go to the inhibitory because that's not helpful in this point. You also have a vasomotor center. Vasomotor center is going to stimulate smooth muscle, especially in your arterioles and your arteries, and you're going to cause vasoconstriction. Why is this going to help? Again, if you are decreasing the diameter of the blood vessel and you are increasing the total peripheral resistance or the peripheral resistance, then you are increasing blood pressure by doing so. So yes, you are decreasing blood flow, but you're increasing pressure. And a lot of times pressure needs to be maintained. Because remember, if you have a smaller blood vessel, there's going to be increased resistance and there's going to be more pressure pushed on the walls of that vessel than if you had a larger vessel. So if you want to increase your blood pressure, then you're going to vasoconstrict. You're going to do this. So increase cardiac output, you're going to increase total peripheral resistance, then you're going to get back to your normal blood pressure. You also, so not only baroreceptors or your stretch receptors, you're going to look at chemoreceptors, meaning that they're going to look at the chemical levels that are in your blood. So this is looking at the level of carbon dioxide. If you have a decrease in pH, which remember it is acidic, or oxygen levels as well. So making sure these are all at the appropriate levels is monitored by chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors are in multiple places. Your carotid arteries, which are going to be major arteries in your neck, which we'll see in lab. The aorta, major artery coming off the heart. And then they're also in the brain, in the brainstem, the medulla oblongata. Makes sense if we need to change cardiac output or any vasomotor center, then it'll be right there. We're going to talk a lot in chemoreceptors, what this response is when we get to the respiratory system. But if you have an increase in carbon dioxide or a decrease in pH in your acidic or your decreased oxygen levels, you're going to compensate by increasing your respiratory rate, meaning you're going to breathe faster. And like I said, we're going to cover this a lot when we get to the respiratory system. But major factor is going to be that we're going to increase blood pressure and cardiac output. Why? Well, we want to get rid of this. Get rid of it. How do we do it? Increase the blood pressure and increase cardiac output. We want to kind of get rid of pH. We want more oxygen to our tissues. So you're going to stimulate your heart rate to increase cardiac output. More blood flow, then the more blood can take away the hydrogen ions, get rid of the pH, the more it can take away carbon dioxide, and the more it can deliver oxygen. It also increases vasoconstriction. So yes, this is decreasing blood flow. But if we're decreasing blood flow even further to our capillaries, we're allowing even more time for exchange. So we can get more hydrogen ions out, get rid of more carbon dioxide, and we can deliver more oxygen. So again, another picture. So we have increased carbon dioxide, you have decreased pH, acidic, decreased O2. Chemoreceptors in those places that I talked about. Medulla has respiratory centers. Again, that's going to help because if we need to get rid of carbon dioxide, well, breathing does that. If we need more oxygen, breathing does that. So that's going to be why that is. Again, we're going to go over that a lot. When we get to the respiratory center, you're going to increase heart rate by cardioacceleratory centers. You're going to stimulate the vasomotor, so you're going to vasoconstrict. So you're going to increase your respiratory rate, but we're not focusing on that as much yet. Increase cardiac output, increase blood pressure by just increasing the cardiac output, and vasoconstriction as well. So you're going to increase your pH, increase your oxygen delivery, and then you're going to decrease your carbon dioxide. Endocrine responses to low blood pressure and also low blood volume. So this is not neurons, this is hormones. And hormones are your long-term control. So they take a little longer. So your nervous system is going to be your immediate response, and then your hormones will come after. They're longer term, so they're longer lasting, but they take a sec to get there. So it can be short term, but if we need longer term, hormones are going to be the thing. So we're going to look at specifically the heart actually has a response. The kidneys is going to be a major factor. The kidneys really like to maintain their blood flow and their right blood pressure. They're like Goldilocks. They like it just right. And the pituitary gland is going to be two of the hormones. There's more. Is going to be the major one, or antidiuretic hormone is the one we're going to talk about today. There's another one that we'll talk about when we get to the endocrine system. So how do we respond first to low blood pressure? First is going to be our catecholamines, or epinephrine and norepinephrine. So these are going to be more quick to respond, and they increase heart rate, and they're going to cause vasoconstriction. So all the things that we just talked about of increasing cardiac output here, and then increase total peripheral resistance, which increases blood pressure as well. So response to that. These are released from the middle of the adrenal glands. Again, we'll go over these a lot more when we get to the endocrine system as well. Other ones are going to be antidiuretic hormone, which we'll talk about. It's the pituitary gland. Angiotensin 2, which is going to be a response from the kidneys. Erythropoietin, we talk about, is going to be released by the kidneys as well. That's literally increasing the amount of red blood cells. So if you want to increase the production of red blood cells, erythropoietin is going to do so. Aldosterone is another one that is released by actually your adrenal glands that we'll talk about. That is going to increase your sodium retention in your kidneys. And we're going to talk about this a lot more when we get to kidneys and the hormone endocrine system. You will kind of theme that you'll hear me all the time is sodium and water go together. So wherever salt goes, or wherever sodium goes, water will follow. Just kind of sings the song Every Step You Take and just follows it. So sodium is always going to follow, or water's always going to follow sodium. So if it increases sodium retention and keeping sodium in your body, water's going to follow. So again, epinephrine, adrenal medulla. Sympathetic stimulation, so the sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. Increases cardiac output, usually increases heart rate that way. Vasoconstriction, and a lot of times this is the abdominal organ specifically. Why? We don't care about digesting right now. We either need to run, flight, or we need to fight. So you're going to actually switch and vasodilate to your heart. You're increasing heart rate, you need more blood supply, and your skeletal muscle. Why? Sympathetic fight or flight. So this can also be released because you need more oxygen. So mainly what the first ones that are going to want to hog the oxygen is going to be your heart muscle and your skeletal muscle. So this can happen pretty quickly. So vasodilation is you're going to increase blood flow to the heart and skeletal muscle because you've decreased resistance. And opposite is true. You're not worrying about digesting your food or doing anything like that because you're focusing on other things. Antidiuretic hormone. So it's in the name. Diuresis means kind of basically you can think of as a pee, making pee. So anti-diuretic hormone, I call the anti-P hormone. It is released by the pituitary, specifically it's the back end or the posterior pituitary, and that is going to increase blood pressure. Why? You're going to keep your water. You reduce water loss in the kidneys. That's why it's anti-P. So if you are not urinating as much, you are keeping your water. Keeping water keeps blood pressure high. Because remember, a lot of blood is going to be water. So if you're going to keep water, you're going to keep pressure on the vessel walls. And so then you're going to keep blood pressure high. This responds to low blood volume. So if you're bleeding, you're going to release this. A major one is going to be high plasma osmotic pressure, meaning dehydration. If you haven't drank enough, then your low blood volume is kind of that, and you have a higher osmotic pressure. And then angiotensin 2 is another hormone. Angiotensin 2 is going to be specifically released secondary to the kidneys. So if the kidneys are detecting a low blood pressure, then they're going to release a hormone called renin. Renin then causes the release of angiotensin 1. Then it converts by an angiotensin converting enzyme, so ACE, is going to convert it to angiotensin 2. That is going to happen in the liver. So renin, angiotensin 1, angiotensin 2 is then going to stimulate the release of aldosterone. Angiotensin 2 is a vasoconstrictor on its own too. So help. But it's also going to cause the release of aldosterone that's going to be from the adrenal glands. Again, we're going to talk about this again. So again, aldosterone promotes sodium retention, meaning you keep your salt, you keep your sodium. Wherever sodium goes, water chases after it. So if you're keeping your sodium, you're keeping your water. It also helps with the anti-P, anti-diuretic, so also helping in keeping your water as well. It's actually going to make you thirsty because it's most often your low blood volume or you're dehydrated, so increasing thirst increases your blood volume just by absorbing more water in your intestinal tract. You increase your cardiac output. So oftentimes it's going to be heart rate as well, and then vasoconstriction as well, all increasing blood pressure. Erythropoietin is another hormone that's released by the kidneys. That is going to be low blood pressure and also low oxygen to the kidneys. So what carries oxygen? Red blood cells. So what's a way that we can increase oxygen carrying capacity of our blood? So the amount of oxygen that we can carry, you make more of them. So increase red blood cells. So you get more red blood cell production, increases your blood volume. More blood volume means more pressure on the vessel walls, which means more blood pressure. So just looking at it again, so short-term effects, baroreceptors, adrenal hormones of epinephrine and norepinephrine is going to increase cardiac output and vasoconstrict. Then we also have angiotensin 2. Again, it's going to help with anti-diuretic or the anti-P hormone, so you're going to keep water in your kidneys. Aldosterone is going to keep sodium in your kidneys, and you're going to want to drink a lot. All of these are going to increase your blood volume and increase your blood pressure. Then also erythropoietin is going to be released by the kidneys, increase red blood cell production. To get angiotensin 2, renin is the first hormone that's released by the kidneys that then leads to angiotensin 2. So it's a little cascade that happens. You have to have renin, and then you go angiotensin 1, and then you go angiotensin 2, and then you go aldosterone. So oftentimes you'll hear this as the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, or kind of the RAS. So if you have high BP, high blood pressure, and high blood volume, so you're going to have an increase in stretch, especially even on the heart during diastole, because there's increase of venous return. Increased venous return is going to stretch on the heart. This causes a release of natriuretic peptides. So there's two types. There's atrial natriuretic peptide that's released by the right atrium, recognizing increased venous return. There's also a brain natriuretic peptide that's going to be released from the ventricles of the brain. So if you have a lower blood volume and pressure, then there's less stretch on the atria, and there's less production of the natriuretic peptides. But if you have an increase in the blood volume and the pressure on the atria, then you're going to have an increase in natriuretic peptides. So again, atrial natriuretic peptide is released by the right atrium. If you have an increase of diastolic stretching, so pressure, so this is going to be overload of the atria, the right atrium. So this is going to be increased when blood volume is too high. So what are you going to do to decrease your blood volume? Well, what did I just say all the time? Wherever sodium goes, water will follow. So if you get rid of more sodium in the kidney, you're going to get rid of water. You're also going to push water out on its own. There's going to be specific kind of mechanisms we'll talk when we get to the urinary system. You're not going to be thirsty. You're going to stop drinking. You're going to block ADH, or the antidiuretic hormone. So if that's the anti-P hormone, blocking it, P. You don't want aldosterone because you want to get rid of sodium. You don't want epinephrine and norepinephrine because those are causing increase of heart rate and increased cardiac output. You don't want that right now. And you also don't want vasoconstriction, you want vasodilation. So you want to get to the point where there's less pressure and less stretch on those blood vessels, so you're going to make the diameter larger. So again, if you have an increase of blood pressure, so oftentimes if someone has what we call hypertension or high blood pressure, this is going to be why it puts a lot of pressure on the heart. So if you increase blood volume, it's going to increase blood pressure. If you have naturally increased blood pressure for whatever reason, then you're going to have increased stretch on the right atrium, specifically the cardiac muscle cells, release atrial natriuretic peptide. So kidneys are going to respond. Again, increase sodium loss. Wherever sodium goes, water will follow. Increase water loss. You're not going to be thirsty. You're going to increase urine production. Decrease aldosterone release, which is going to help with losing more sodium here. And no norepinephrine or epinephrine, and you cause vasodilation. That's our compensation of decreasing blood pressure and blood volume. So the purpose of, again, we've talked about vasoconstriction and vasodilation is helping control blood pressure. Now, this isn't always just when things are abnormal. Sometimes, again, based on what's happening in your life and what you're doing, then you're going to change where blood flow is going. And you're going to do this by either vasoconstricting in certain areas to decrease blood flow, or you're going to vasodilate in some areas to increase blood flow. So first off, exercise. You are not worrying about making as much pee, and you are not worrying about digesting as much because the sympathetic nervous system is going to reduce blood flow to that. You're exercising. Where is all your blood flow going? Your skeletal muscles. That's where you need it. At that point, you are moving, you are exercising, you're walking, you're running, you're rowing, stepping, doing whatever you do, or lifting weights. Either way, you're going to need increased blood flow to your skeletal muscles. They need more oxygen, more oxygen. So you want, how are you going to get more oxygen to this area? More blood flow. And that's going to be where you're going to allow the blood flow to go to skeletal muscles, stop it from other areas. You're going to redirect. If you're just chilling after you ate a really large meal, so think of Thanksgiving, you've eaten a lot of turkey and a lot of food and you're stuffed, then you are not going to be concerned about muscles because you're just sitting down. And think about it, your lower limbs, your legs, have a lot of muscles and they have a lot of blood flow to go to them. So you're actually going to reduce blood flow by vasoconstricting to your legs. And that's going to help because blood BP is going to increase. Why? Because there's more blood volume that's going to be in your abdomen. Because you've stopped blood flow to your legs, or at least reduced it. Obviously, you're not cutting off blood supply, but you're going to reduce it. That means there's more blood flowing above your legs. More blood equals increased blood pressure. More blood pushing against the vessel walls. So this is going to help blood flow to go to the intestines. What are you doing after you ate a big meal? You are processing it and digesting it. That's happening in your intestines. Sometimes, again, when we talked about metabolite accumulation, things like decreased pH, increased carbon dioxide, then you will have kind of changes in your local circulation without kind of affecting doing this whole kind of rearranging thing. So this is just looking at, again, at rest. Notice how the brain, you're always going to have the same blood supply. No matter what you're doing, your brain cannot be cut off. Doesn't care. It's always getting the same amount. If you're exercising some, the heart is going to take more because it's beating faster and it needs more blood supply. It's a muscle as well. If you're resting and digesting, more blood flow to the kidneys. The more you start exerting, the less blood flow to the kidneys. You're not worrying about making urine right now. Same thing with the intestinal. If you're resting and digesting, there's a lot more blood supply to the stomach or the abdominal viscera, meaning the digestive system. And then as you start exercising more and exerting more, then you don't need to worry about your digestive system. Skin, think of it as cooling yourself down. So when you're resting and digesting, you don't need that much. It's going to increase as your exertion increases. Why? Dilating the blood vessels and sending more blood to the surface of the skin is going to increase your heat loss. Why is that important? Well, you're making a lot of heat. You're using your muscles a lot, so you're increasing your body temp, and you are going to help decrease that temperature back to normal. Then look at the difference again. If you're resting and digesting, skeletal muscles don't get much. Then look how significantly it changes, and then look how huge that is if you're really exerting yourself. Because remember, from the skeletal muscle system, ATP is used constantly to contract skeletal muscles. They can't do anything without ATP. So how are you going to make more ATP? Oxygen. So oxygen has to go. How are you going to get more oxygen? Increase blood flow.